All right, friends, it is the moment that you have been waiting for. We are going to talk about 2.6. We're going to do some kind of introductory notes just to make the burden a little bit less later on. So this will be short and sweet. Then there's some practice problems you need to do. There's an answer bank, so match them up, submit your answers, take a picture of your work. Your work shouldn't be very extensive though, so this should not be a huge time commitment. What we're going to be practicing is a review topic that we're going to need to know to be successful in 2.6. We're going to try to simplify what we call rational expressions and then decide what values are excluded. Basically, excluded values will make the denominator, which is a fancy word for the bottom, equal 0. So let me just bust through a few examples and then we'll just call it a day. Say that I had x squared minus 3x minus 10. This is called a rational function, and the reason it's called a rational function is rational means fraction, and function is something involving x, and since this is a fraction involving x, we call it a rational function, and that's what we're going to be dealing with in 2.6. Sounds exciting. So how do you go about simplifying? Basically, what you're going to do is if you're told to simplify, and that'll be the starting point for what we do in 2.6, the first thing that you're going to do is factor the top and the bottom. And then you're going to cancel common factors. It's like reducing. So like if you have like 10 over 20, you're thinking, well, that's 10 times 1, and this is 10 times 2, so I can cancel those common factors and get a half. That process, which you're smart and do in your brain, is the same as what we're going to do. We're going to factor the top, bottom, cancel the common factors, and therefore we will simplify. Or another word you're probably used to from the past is reduce. But the verb is going to be to simplify when it's telling you what to do. So in this particular problem, now again, you have to be good at factoring. So if you still haven't watched the factoring video or tried any of that, you might want to go back and do so. When I go to factor the top, I'm looking for 10. So 1 times 10 or 2 times 5 in a way that subtracts to be 3. So I'm going with the 5 and the 2. To get a negative 3, I'll have minus 5, positive 2. On the bottom, this one's going to be that difference of squares where x squared is the square of x and 25 is the square of 5. That breaks down, and again, this comes way back from that factoring video, x plus 5, x minus 5. So I did my factoring. Now I'm going to cancel common factors. That's these two. So my answer will simply be what's left, x plus 2 over x plus 5. So that's the first thing. That's really all you have to do on the worksheet practice for today. But I want you to kind of start thinking about what would be excluded. And excluded is x values that you can't use because, like I said up here, they make the bottom 0. And you have to do that before you're canceling, or at least look at both options. So like in this case, x could not be here a negative 5 because that would make this left factor 0. And then I think about what number would make this factor a 0, because you can't have 0 in the bottom of a fraction. You can't divide by 0. So negative 5 and positive 5 will be what we call the excluded values, because if I put either one of those into the bottom of my original problem, they would make this 0, and then that would be bad. Okay, so let me try one more example. I'm going to go ahead and let's say I have x squared minus 6 over x minus 3. Okay, so on the top, I'm looking at 6, 1 and 6, 2 and 3. I need them to subtract to be 1. So I'm going to pick this pair. So the top is going to factor into an x. Now I need it to be a negative 1 here, so I'm going to need a negative 3 and a plus 2. And on the bottom, I actually can't factor that. When the x is to the power of 1, you cannot factor it. So I'm going to factor and then cancel. And so in this case, my final simplified answer is just x plus 2 because everything else canceled out. But when I'm supposed to say, hey, what are my excluded values? And even though your homework doesn't ask you to do that, I would start thinking about it. Here, x cannot be 3, because if you look back to the original bottom, if you were to plug in a 3, it would make the bottom 0. So x cannot be 3. So one last example. Now, keep in mind, sometimes they don't cancel, just like numbers. It's possible, whoa, that's not what I meant to do. It's possible if I had like 11 over 23, it just doesn't factor, and so it doesn't reduce. And so then it just stays 11 over 23. That can sometimes happen as well. It won't happen a lot because we're practicing simplifying, but just so you know, if you come across one that doesn't factor, it's just like a prime number. So let's take something that looks a little more complex to begin with, since we're fancy and we're in pre-calc. And the only reason I want to look at one of these is people get all freaked out by these. But keep in mind, and I always say this, that you got to check first. The first thing you always do, if you looked back at that factoring video, is you look for the greatest common factor. Gotta check first. So if I'm checking for that, this becomes less overwhelming. And I can see that in the top, I could take out a 3x, leaving me with x squared minus 2x minus 3. On the bottom, my greatest common factor will be a 6x squared, leaving me, if I take that out of here, with an x minus 3. But you have to be careful, because once you've taken out that GCF, you still have to look at what you got left in each situation and decide if that factors. On the bottom, this will not factor anymore because it's just a plain x, it's not to a power. On the top, there's a chance that this one factors, and it does, because I would need 3 in a way that subtracts to be 2. So I have a 3 and a 1. To get a negative 2, I'd need a negative 3 and a positive 1. So now, this is a little tricky to see over here, I'm sorry. Now I have to go through and really be careful. First of all, I'm going to do my excluded, excuse me, values right away before I cancel them out. Looking at this factor right here, I'm saying, okay, what would make that 0? 3. So x cannot be 3, or it would make a 0 on the bottom, and you can't have that. And then don't let this confusify you, because that can't be 0 either, and the only way it will be 0 is if x has a value of 0, because 6 times 0 squared would be 0. So here are my excluded values. X cannot be 3 or 0. Let's go back to canceling. The x minus 3's cancel. Now, think about this. I have 1x on the top and 2x on the bottom. So this one cancels one of these, because it's like having an x on the top and 2 down here. One cancels out, but you have a leftover on the bottom. And then the other thing, this doesn't change since elementary school. 3 over 6 is still going to reduce to 1/2. So when I'm finished, I'd have a 1/2. So I'm having 2 on the bottom. I have that x that got left over on the bottom. And on the top, I have x plus 1. And I have a really big fraction line that I don't need. So my answer is going to be this. The danger in waiting until the end to do your excluded values is by looking at this bad boy, you would only see that you need that 0. You would not remember the 3. And so it's always a good idea before you cancel to make sure that you have all the excluded values. Now, again, your worksheet isn't going to force you to do excluded values, but it is going to be a really key thing for what we're going to start learning in 2-6. So I would probably take some time to make sure I understand that, and maybe even jot them down. I'll provide an answer key for the excluded values so that you can see if you're doing them right. Have a great day, evening, whenever you're watching this. See you soon. Bye.